Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at JCI UK's panel event around International Women's Day. We've actually just had a really interesting conversation before starting as to, do we say Happy International Women's Day? It's something that you'll have seen a lot on social today and around the event, but obviously it's not exactly a happy day. It's a day when we're actually highlighting a lot of stuff that should change and needs to change. So there is definitely a happy element to it. We're celebrating a lot of amazing women. We're celebrating how far we've come, but we're absolutely focusing on that change element. What else is there that needs to be done? So for those of you who I've not met before, my name's Ilona Alcock. I'm a director on the JCI UK National Board. I'm a JCI UK Senator, and I'm also co-founder and director of a business development consultancy called Elevate. And one of the reasons why we're called Elevate and why I love doing what we do is it is a way of elevating people, and we're really passionate about using our platform and our privilege to make sure that more voices are heard. I'm absolutely delighted this evening to be joined by three incredible women who are going to share their various personal experiences, their opinions on what's going on, and there are a lot of opinions to be shared on everything that's going on at the moment. We're then going to open up into Q&A. So if you have any questions that you want to ask the panel, anything that you think would be useful to discuss, feel free to drop that in the chat and we'll pick that up, and or you can unmute yourself and ask that question when we get to that section. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my panelists to introduce themselves in turn. So first of all, I'm going to go to my boss, Phoebe Benter.
Excellent, thank you. So good evening, everybody. I am Phoebe Benter. I'm the current National President for JCI UK 2021. And probably just a little bit about myself. So I'm originally from the Caribbean. I've been in the UK for about 10 years now. And yes, throughout that time, just taking every opportunity as it comes, got involved in as much projects and different things. But I launched the East Midlands Charity Awards as well as the Northwest Charity Awards as part of my contribution to the community. A lot of amazing work taking place, and I just saw that there was a gap in terms of no one's really putting these mainly small charities at the forefront to showcase what they're doing, and as well letting them have that platform to get people in to support the work that they're doing. So that's one of my highlights in terms of things that I do. For my day job outside JCI UK, I work for Atos Medical, which is a medical device company, and I'm currently the global digital events manager. Everything's changed this year, so as my role in terms of making sure all our events take place and using technology now to assist not just the UK market, but all the other markets that Atos Medical is in, the US, Australia, and the rest of Europe. So that's just a little bit about me.
That's it. That's all she does. Later spare time. Obviously, lots of evenings for you to come and do this. Probably need to pick up the pace a little bit there. So next, if we go to Jen.
Hello, good evening from Germany. I'm Jennifer Polzin, Jen, and my pronouns are she and her. And I'm happy to chair this year's JCI Europe Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And this is more or less the reason I'm here. So I'm involved with diversity and inclusion, or I have been involved many years with the topic. And of course, I've been in JCI as well. So I've been a local president in my home city in Cologne. And we are a very open-minded city, and when I got into the broader field in JCI Germany, I saw that this is not the average. So I realized, oh, we maybe have to do our homework here, and this got me involved as well in the topic. In my professional life, I'm also involved with the diversity and inclusion topic, but I'm also a marketeer. I'm doing digital development and also consultancy in new work and how to improve ways of working, agile mindset, and change management. And I try to be my true self and lead by example with that. And I know that we can find the best ideas if we are all our true selves. And this is why I'm fighting for diversity and inclusion. And for sure, gender equality is a big part of that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks ever so much. And we're really, really grateful for you for joining us this evening and bringing that expertise with you. Last but not least, Mel.
Wow, how do I follow those two? My name's Mel. I'm a freelance digital marketer. I started my business around this time last year, just moments before a worldwide pandemic, which was brilliant. And yeah, it's going from strength to strength. I work with a huge variety of clients. One thing I am really passionate about is ensuring that people's content is accessible and able to be viewed by all. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks ever so much, Mel. And yeah, huge congratulations on building up that business over the pandemic. I've obviously watched that journey closely and it has been a huge inspiration. And we're delighted that one of the clients Mel has is JCI UK. I'm really pleased to be able to get her involved in events like this as well, doing a lot of work for us behind the scenes. Now, one of the things that I didn't realise until fairly recently was that when I would talk about gender equality, I think somebody might just need to mute themselves there in the participants. Thank you ever so much. We'll just get a little bit of feedback there. So sorry, as I was saying, that when I looked at feminism and I looked at gender equality, I very much put myself in the position of, you know, I'm a woman, therefore, you know, I am the person who's been negatively impacted by the patriarchy and everything that was going on. And what I hadn't kind of appreciated was, whilst that was true, I was still in this enormous position of power and privilege because I'm able-bodied, I'm straight, I'm white, I'm middle class, I'm well-educated. You know, all of those things went into giving me a very particular view on gender equality and feminism. And it's only more recently that I've started to look at intersectional feminism and what that kind of means for people of colour, what it means for the LGBT community, what does it mean for people who don't have the same backgrounds that I have. And not just what does that mean, but also how does my behaviour, my language and what I do need to alter so that I'm truly champion equality, not just a particular slice of it. So I'm going to, again, go to the panellists in the same order as we did before, just to give us a little bit their views on that intersectional feminism, but to give some of their kind of personal examples of living with the summer issues that I've mentioned. So if I could come to you first, Phoebe.
Yeah, so this whole conversation, especially with all these new terms as well, you know, it's quite new to me, and even having this kind of conversation as well is quite interesting. But in terms of this particular topic, I saw a quote, and I think that's, you know, something, I think this just sums it all up in one. And it's like, it goes, if you see inequality as a them problem or unfortunate other problem, that is the problem. And I think that is it. Like, I've had various different experiences, and you know, when I bring it up to other people, it will be, oh, I never knew that is happening. Yeah, because you're not in my shoe. You won't know until you're in that kind of position, and you could actually, you know, have that honest conversation. And I think that's something that only recently I've been able to have some of these conversations, because, you know, everything that's been happening over the last couple of months, you know, I feel a bit more confident having certain conversations. But I think that quote that I saw just stands out, because a lot of times it's a them problem, and then that is the problem right there. So I think that's, for me, in terms of that comment, it's one of those things. It's like, what could we all do, you know, together that will help, you know, get us away from the us against them kind of situation. And a lot of people don't see themselves in that unfortunate or that category, whereas unless you live in that situation, you could comment on it. But I do think a lot of women, we're not talking about these kind of issues. So it'll be interesting for me to hear what the other panelists have to say, because this is pretty new to me, and I'm trying to, you know, engage more with these type of conversation, because it's something, especially coming from a Caribbean background, is we don't talk about anything. We don't talk about feelings. We don't, you know, we don't hug people. You know, when I first came to England, it's like, yeah, I didn't hug people. I was like, oh God, you know, we don't have emotions, you know, you just meant to be strong and just try and do everything kind of situation. So it'd be really interesting to hear the rest of the panelists in this conversation, and for me to reflect as well on how I could contribute here.
Wonderful, thank you, Phoebe. And that sounds so strange to me, because I've obviously seen you in more recent years as somebody who is much more open in terms of having those conversations, and I've definitely hugged you a lot, so apologies if I just leapt straight in there with it. But it is amazing seeing that change over the last year or so, particularly around things with the Black Lives Matter protest, that suddenly everybody was talking about it, and then speaking to some of my friends, and they're like, well, I don't want to have to talk about it. I've lived with this forever. Like, this isn't new and exciting and topical. This is my life. And suddenly it was like the thing that was everywhere, and we perhaps didn't take into account, like, living with that day to day is exhausting. Like, we don't want to then be suddenly like held up as being the spokesperson for a particular issue overnight. And it's, looking at the Meghan Markle interview that's been screened in the US last night and has been screened in the UK today, that you can see that those issues of racism are alive and well all the way through our society, and we're probably still not having the conversations that we need to have. So thanks ever so much for sharing it. So if I can come to you next, Jen, to kind of give us a bit of your kind of perspective and lens.
Thank you. And you already mentioned something that I can relate to, that you discovered this only recently or during a journey. And I have to admit, when I first heard the hashtag white feminism, I was like, what's that? And I had to really understand it, and I had to Google it, for example, because of course we have all these different dimensions of diversity. We have gender, we have sexual orientation, we have age, and recently we added social background, for example. So I can relate from that perspective, for example, coming from a working class family and getting into university and academic studies. This I felt very wrong many times. And I think this is part of being being discriminated, not feeling right, not feeling welcome, not feeling not feeling as you would belong there. And of course, now we have all this vocabulary to understand and to talk about these effects. Now, what happens if I'm a woman, and what happens if I'm a gay woman? What happens if I'm a disabled woman? And what happens if I have all these features? But of course, the deeper you dive into the categories, you see the borders are blending into each other. And especially if you talk about abilities and disability. What is a disability really? Yeah, I'm wearing contact lenses. This is not really making my life harder, but it's kind of seen as a disability, even though you do not see it. And there's all the disabilities and diseases you do not see. So there's so many things which makes us all very diverse. Yeah. So meaning, yeah, we have certain groups that suffer from this in a very accumulated way. So they have different dimensions, and they relate to that dimensions. And this is, of course, something that we discovered and we have to understand. And I think, why do we have to focus on women? Because women are not a minority. Women are not a minority. Women are a marginalized group as other marginalized groups, but they make up, they are a huge amount of people on this planet. So let's start with this dimension and improve all the other dimensions attached to that, and start with this big group, which is not a minority. And this is my view on intersectionism. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And that's such a good summary of those mix of issues. It's like you can go down so niche into so many different areas, and what does this mean? But actually, when you take a bit of a step back on gender equality, like, we're not a minority. This isn't a small group of people that are trying to get their voices heard. It's, it's half the world's population. Like, there's something that's gone very kind of categorically wrong in the developments of our society for half the population not to have the same voice. One of the stats that was shared with me a couple of years ago now, it's an organisation called Yellow Jigsaw, did a campaign around it, and it was their I'm Not John campaign. And you are actually more likely, if you are the CEO of a FTSE 100 company, you're more likely to be a man called John than a woman. And when I found this out and I shared it to someone, their actual response was, yeah, but John's a really common name. I'm like, it is, but it's not 51% of the world common. No, it's not that level. And it's when you start looking at those things that it's like, you know, we're happy because there are some women in these positions. It's like, well, we can't be happy until it's half. It should at least reflect the society that we're living in. So if I can come to you, Mel, next. I know that's one of the facts that you shared in your video for me earlier today, and it's good to hear it repeated, as harrowing as it is. It is a good one to highlight.
It is. It's horrific. But in terms of kind of intersectional feminism, apologies. I think as a white woman, I'm very conscious to not ask my friends who are people of colour, what does this mean? I'm very conscious to educate myself. I don't think it's a person of colour's position to educate me. That's not where they stand. And I think, unfortunately, that's where a lot of people stand. They're like, well, okay, well, if you want me to know about these racial issues, tell me about them. No, go and get a book and educate yourself. And that's what you need to do. Now, I'm a white woman. I'm from a middle-class background as well. I'm pansexual, so I have been discriminated for in the past for that. Actually went to Budapest with my fiance, and we had quite a bad time there, unfortunately, but thankfully Manchester's, which is where I live, is a kind of very open community. It more often than not is a really nice place to be as a person in the LGBTQ plus community. But in terms of intersectionality, I keep getting the word intersectional feminism, I think what's really important and what's really great to see is there is quite a few men on this call today, because more often than not on International Women's Day, it's only women that attend these things. And I think it's really important that if you're not in this marginalized group, then you need to proactively educate yourself and not rely on the people in that group to educate you.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, coming back to kind of some of the feelings that we had watching all those Black Lives Matter protests last year, is like, I started to kind of unpick that level of privilege, and it's horrific and it's exhausting and it's hard work, but like, how lucky am I that I can choose to learn about racism? It's like, I haven't lived it. So however tough it is, you're absolutely right. There is that responsibility, and there is no shortage of material out there. That sometimes kind of people have said to me, oh, well, you know, if we want to do more to, you know, talk about, you know, gender equality, racial equality, sexual equality, like everything else, it's like, we need that person to come and tell us. And it's like, yeah, there's literally a book. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you don't sit there and be like, you know, I can't learn anything else for myself. It's like that's how you learn. And there are huge swathes of, you know, film, TV, literature, everything that goes into this. And I think what's really interesting then is we can kind of get so caught up in learning about it that I've seen then people talk over people's lived experiences and be like, oh, I've read about this, I'm an expert on this issue. And it's no, mate, you read a book. Like, I don't care what you read about feminism. Like, if a woman's talking, shut up and listen. Like, you can learn from people around you, but if all they see is people talking over them and their experiences, you're just listening to try and sound good. You know, the lip service that is paid to these issues is fairly terrifying. You know, I've been scrolling through social today, and it's been some amazing commentary shared and great initiatives, and lots of people doing brilliant work. And I know for a fact that they do that work 365 days a year. And then you have men and women who I know who are horrific for gender equality, doing the whole virtue signaling posts. And it's, you know, that's not what it's about. And I'm really pleased that when we started pulling this together, the kind of the theme that ran through it was, this is the start of something, not a showcase of something, that it is that challenge part. We are going to come on to allyship a little bit later, and we deliberately placed that just before we go into the Q&A section. So if there are people listening who, you know, it is a safe space, if you want to ask questions of, should I say this, should I do this, what do you think about this, like, now's your time, ask those questions, and we'll also kind of give you some examples of where that's worked really well. But the next topic that I wanted us to cover on the panel is the issue of children. So I've told this story many times, sadly, because I've had to. I got married at 24. I'm now 38. I've had 14 years of, when are you having children? The amount of people who think that my uterus is their business blows my mind. And what I've kind of started saying in more recent years, as I've become more confident in that, is saying, okay, well, as it happens, I'm child-free by choice. My husband and I have made the decision that we don't want children, and we've never tried to have them. However, within a fairly small, close group of friends and family, I can give you examples of multiple failed attempts at IVF. My best friend's daughter lived for an hour. Another close friend's daughter was strangled by the umbilical cord as she was giving birth. These are very personal, very difficult issues that have absolutely nothing else to do with other people. And these aren't people that are close to me that are having these conversations. The people I'm close to, we chat about absolutely everything, like, that's cool. I'll talk about my decisions whether or not to have children with the people that I trust and I want to open up to. These are things like at networking events that people will ask me these questions, and then they'll say things like, oh, that's okay. I'm like, was not waiting for your permission. I had a next door neighbour in my old house tell me to stop being so miserable by not wanting to be a mother. I've had people tell me that I'm preventing my husband from being a father, as if it's, you know, it's all down to me. And what's been incredible over that time is that I don't think on any one occasion have those questions ever been put to my husband. It's always been placed to me as if, you know, my role in life is to be a mother, and it's somehow unnatural and wrong that isn't something that appeals to me. However, it is important that we do talk about the role that being a mother has in women in business, and particularly around female entrepreneurs, because whilst not having children has created some issues in a business context for me in terms of those conversations, I've also seen people discriminated against because they're working part-time due to childcare. We've seen, you know, the huge pressures that homeschooling have had, and that burden lies disproportionately still on women. Although we do have more shared parental leave and more conversations going on, it's still very much seen that childcare is a women's issue. So now I've got my rant out the way for the day, I'm going to pass over to the panelists to share some of their thoughts and experiences around that kind of role of childcare and motherhood in terms of business and entrepreneurship. So if I could come to you first, Mel.
Oh, we've reversed it.
Thought I'd mix things up.
So I've had some quite personal experiences with this particular subject. So as I mentioned before, I'm a pansexual woman, and I'm engaged to another female. We have a child in our relationship. We've also been trying for another one for the past year using IVF. And throughout that time, with each failed attempt, we've had, you know, close relatives say, oh, Mel, would you not try and carry? And, you know, some family and friends aren't aware that it's not something I'm able to do. My body isn't able to do that. And obviously that's a difficult subject. It's something that it's none of your business. And the second question we're often asked is, why don't you just adopt? And it's you know, it's kind of not about that. It's about kind of what we want and the journey that we want to take and the journey we've started on that we want to complete. And being two females in a relationship with a daughter as well. You know, we often are on days out or anything like that, and people are like, oh, where's daddy and things like that, and it's often mentioned. And you know, it's 2021. There's very big mix of you know, families now. There's people with two dads. There's people with just one dad, with one mum. You know, people are going through IVF on their own and things like that, and people are adopting on their own, like males. And anybody that's got a child is you know, is really strong, in my opinion, because it's hard work. it's, you know, it's very rewarding at the same time, but it is hard work, and I'm sure anybody else that's got a child in a pandemic can vouch for that as well. But yeah, so I would probably say as a woman, you are asked, no matter which route you're going down, whether it's not to have children or you're struggling to have children, you get why. And it's not about the why. Sometimes we just want to lean on you and we just want a bit of support. And I think that's what you know, allies and other people just need to realize, that sometimes when people are going through whether they've decided not to have children or whether they've decided to have them and they're struggling, they just want your support. And I don't think that's very hard to ask for.
No, it's not. And, you know, you've been so open in your journey over the last year. And, you know, I've seen, you know, the grief that you've gone through, and it is grief, like you're losing a child, however early that is in the process, that is what's happening. And I know from you sharing that and being open about it, it's made it easier for other people to be able to share some of their journeys. And hopefully it is a little bit of a flag to those people who still see it as something that's an open topic of conversation in totally inappropriate places, to realise what kind of can of worms they might be opening. And absolutely, like if we're open up and sharing, it can be for support. You know, we're not looking for someone to tell us how to do things. You know, the levels of judgment that women have to go through in terms of, you know, how we essentially use our bodies is mind blowing. We had a conversation earlier today around, you know, the politics and pressure of breastfeeding. I'm like, this poor woman's like, she's just, you know, she's created a human, like leave her alone. Like how she feeds it, as long as it's getting fed, like back off. But you still get that kind of, you know, judgment passed across, which is, yeah, absolutely blows my mind, that they're conversations that we're still having. So if I could come to you next, Jen.
Thank you. I'm shaking my head, I'm nodding, I'm confirming, I'm getting emotional about all these stories, because every woman has a story like this. And we get judged many times about not having children, about having children, about how we educate our children. And just imagine a father on the playground with the children and being on his mobile phone. Imagine a mother being on her mobile phone on the playground. It's judged differently. The father is a caring, nice one. Even though he's looking at his phone, he's working and still watching the children. But the mom, oh, look at her. She's at her phone, candy crushing and not watching the children. Something like this. So much judgment. And you mentioned this about being the mother. It's expected to be the mother, to give this, to devote yourself to society. And then if you decide not to do it because you get a penalty for motherhood, because why do we have this gender pay gap? We have it because of the maternity leave and the non-existing paternity leave. This is our big challenge nowadays. We have to implement a picture of a caring father that is an example for society and that is not laughed about. We currently do not, I mean, we also do not care for mothers too much, but we should honor parents. I mean, maybe we have to remember this in Western culture, I don't know, but this is such a hard job. Look at this, parents going on maternity leave and paternity leave. This is in a development assignment. Treat it like that. This should be equally distributed to men and women. And we should have this as family leave. It's family leave, equally to whom is educating this child or bringing it up, or who brought it to life or something like this. And this should be equal amount of time. So not like fathers being on paternity leave for 2 months, something like this. It should be longer. And then a woman in her 30s is the same risk as the man. This is the point where we have to come to, yeah, so that it is equal, because this is the big thing. When mothers have their leave year and come back, they have lost so much in this time and they cannot recover from this, and the gap widens even more. And I think this is our big challenge. We need caring fathers, and we need to acknowledge care work.
Yeah, So many good points in all of that. Yeah, the way that, you know, we address it, like, you know, those parents aren't equal. And one of the things that, you know, I bang on about relentlessly when I talk about feminism and gender equality is that, like, it's bad for everybody, the situation that we've got now, this idea of toxic masculinity, you know, it's bad for men as well. That, you know, I see these incredible men becoming fathers and not having the same opportunities to spend time with their children. Men who are described as babysitting their own children, like, how offensive is that? It's like, that's his child. What he's doing is looking after his child. So to have someone joke about babysitting, you know, that's not good for the father in the situation either, that they haven't got those same opportunities to care and spend time with their children. Employers are much less likely to be flexible around men with childcare issues because it's not the norm. I've got a couple of friends who've taken advantage of the shared parental leave that we have here, and it's met with absolute confusion by their employers. It's like, we don't know what to do here. We've kind of got our heads around that leave. We don't know what's going on here. And it's been quite challenging for them to be able to access it and get support from employers. But then obviously the flip side is, if the norm is it's women, then, like you say, you're a risk. You're a woman of childbearing age, and therefore you're potentially an expensive hire. Does absolutely nothing for helping the gender pay gap or that kind of equality as we develop our careers. If I could come to you next, Phoebe.
Yeah, so interesting. I think for me, I am number 3 out of 8 children. So I've seen too many babies for a starter and having to look after most of them. But I, you know, especially now in terms of work, I've seen how women who do have kids, you know, discriminated against in the workplace. Obviously, if they do come back, they're put on part-time, or, you know, somebody else gets hired in who's a male to take on that role. And I think for me personally, you know, so a decision like not to have kids, and like, because I know how the system is. I know if I leave now and, you know, I'm getting to the peak of what I think is, you know, my career, and it's nerve-wracking when you get to that point and then you know, you have a kid and then you leave for a couple of months, and then for some weird reason, everybody thinks your brain's gone. Well, that's not the case. And it's just completely madness. I think the system is just rigged against women in general, progressing in the work or wherever it is. You know, I'm quite keen on learning more about what the Scandinavian countries are doing, and similar to what you're saying, Jen, about parent leave, and not just for a mother or father, and, you know, it being equal. And I think that's something, hopefully it comes across, you know, the rest of Europe, because I've had conversations where people say, yeah, the dad is babysitting their own kid. How crazy is that? But yeah, women in general who have kids, you know, even when whatever job they're in, it's 100% most of the time that they're discriminated against. Once they come back into work, they're not as, you know, influential or in the boardrooms or in the meeting. They're given tasks, more admin, and, you know, they're just trying to get back on their feet, where, you know, the brain hasn't gone. They're just as capable as before they left. And I think another thing is what I've seen as well on the news is with the whole pandemic of women being fired because the employers are not being flexible. It's just unimaginable, these kind of stuff happening right now. And they're being fired because they have to look after the kid, whereas the man, you know, free to do whatever, work whenever, and, you know, have no consequences. So I just think it's not fair on everybody. But I do think if we carry on and everybody thinks, well, it's a woman's job, it's never going to, you know, be different. I think the system needs to change in terms of focusing on parents rather than just the mother is doing everything and the childcare and the dad's just, you know, there just doing whatever. I think it needs to be a lot more equal, and there's a lot of really good examples in a few countries in terms of what they're doing, changing away from that. So I think that's something that hopefully we could start seeing implemented in our society here. But right now, I would say I'm in a good position right now in my career, you know, progressing, moving up in the global company, in a global role and stuff. And I would not have a child right now because I would be scared of losing my position, coming back and probably is given to another man, and then just being lost in trying to find my way back into, you know, the position I was, and, you know, how much people respected you when the work you do. I think just seeing how it works, it's very off-putting, and you know, and I think that does play a big part in terms of a woman's mindset after you have a kid trying to go back to work. I think it would affect you in your confidence as well, you know, going back and knowing all these things are against you, you know, how could you build yourself back? So I would just say, you know, it needs to be more on parents rather than the female, and, you know, the males in the relationship or the fathers don't have as much responsibility or accountability in most of this. I think it needs to start with the men.
Yeah, and I think what was really interesting that you mentioned a couple of times, that is like the system's rigged. It's like it's the actual basics of the system that aren't right. And I think when we start talking about things like privilege and equality, it's very easy for people to get defensive, because they're like, well, hang on a minute, like, I'm not sexist, I'm not racist, you know, I'm not any of these things that you're saying, but that doesn't mean they're not benefiting from a system that is. And it's about looking at, you know, how do we unpick and rebuild a system that works for everybody? It is a challenge, but it's one that's going to work better for everyone. We just had a couple of comments saying, one around, unfortunately, so many women leaving their jobs to take care of the children in the pandemic. We've seen that over and over again. It's much more likely to be the woman who gives up the work. Also, traditionally female professions are ones that have been hardest hit by the pandemic, so are more likely to be losing their jobs anyway. And then Neil's just shared around in Finland, so starting this year, Finland will give all parents leave regardless of their gender or whether they're a child's biological parents. Under the new law, each parent will be allowed 164 days. So that there is a very live example of the kind of structural changes that we can see. Now, I did see a company earlier, and it's either TalkTalk or Vodafone, and I will definitely find out which one it is to be able to share with you. But they've brought in a process where new parents coming back to work can work 4 days but still get paid for 5 for the first 6 months. And what I thought was so great with that is what I've seen over and over again is my friends going back to work 4 days and basically having to work 5 in 4 days. So they're literally getting paid 80% for doing 100% of the work, with everything else on top of that, having whatever savings they had going into mat leave have been pretty severely depleted by having not been at work for part of that time. So those kind of things that, you know, companies can bring in and be like, no, actually, like, we get how hard it is, we get how stressful this is something that we can do to make it easier for you, and also commercially makes sense, because they're then going to retain these amazing women that we know are leaving big corporates in droves once they start having children, because they don't feel like they're being treated fairly, they're not being let back at, you know, the good quality work, because they're seeing that their mind is elsewhere. So it's great to see some of that stuff happening within organisations as well at a government level. So what we want to come on to now is talking a little bit around allyship. I was going to apologise for embarrassing him, but actually I'm not remotely sorry at all, so I'm just going to go ahead and embarrass him. I really wanted to just give a massive shout out to Neil at this point. So those of you who are watching this might look at this and be like, here's this, you know, all-female event, and actually not know that this event was originally suggested and organised by a man, Neil, who's on the call today and who sits on JCI's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. One of the things, many things really, that is fantastic about Neil is that he just gets this stuff. He gets why it's an issue, he gets that it needs to change, and he also gets that it doesn't need to be his voice that we hear, that he could see these issues going on. He really wanted to have this event, he really wanted us to highlight these issues, but he wanted to make sure that it was women talking about women. And that to me is just such an absolutely massive thing that allies can do, is to give your space to somebody else. If there are women in your life who've got these stories to tell, and there are, I guarantee you, there are full of stories, examples, opinions, give them a seat at the table. And if that means giving up your seat at the table, then do that. The best thing that you can do is to listen to women when they tell you what's going on, believe them, amplify those voices, and make sure that they have an opportunity to share those stories with the people who need to hear. So I say absolutely massive shout out to Neil for doing that. Some of the examples that I've seen with people close to me that I just thought were great examples. One of my friends had said that somebody at his work had been fired for getting handsy with one of the girls at the Christmas party. And as he said it, I was like, do you mean he got fired for sexually assaulting a woman at a Christmas party? And he went, yes, that's what I meant. And he genuinely thanked me for pointing it out, correcting the language, because he saw it as an opportunity to learn and recognise that the way he spoke about things really mattered. That whole issue of girls and women, I do it all the time and I have to keep correcting myself, but we're not girls, we're women, we don't need to infantilise ourselves. So the language that we use. I've had 2 examples recently of working with big organisations. So one is Bruntwood Works and the other is Electricity Northwest. Both of those meetings, the most senior person on the call was a white man. And as we started pulling together speaker lineups, we flagged up that, as always happens when you start pulling up a speaker lineup, you suddenly realise you've got a load of white men because that's who's been put forward by clients or are more likely to be in those positions of power. And as soon as we flagged it, they both went, yep, good spot. Who are the awesome women and people of colour that we can bring in? And it just wasn't even an issue. It was a thanks for flagging it. Let's do something about it. And that should be the norm, but it isn't. I've worked in organisations that should know a lot better, in female-led organisations that should see that we have that responsibility to make sure that if we're creating a platform, it should be a diverse platform. So I just think it's worth pointing out that, there are some men out there who are genuinely fighting this fight every single day. So I'm going to come on to the panelists in turn to give us kind of some ideas around, allyship, either good examples, bad examples, what you can kind of do to get involved. And then if anybody does have any questions that they'd like to ask the panel, anything that they'd like to know about, which will help them to become better allies, or just anything on the topics that we discovered. If you just bob them in the chat for me, I'll come to them and then give you the opportunity to kind of ask it in person if you want to do that. If not, we can just chat about it from what you've written. So mixing it up, let's come to Jen first.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, as you mentioned, being an ally is key. We need support here. We need supporters in every corner for every dimension. But as I mentioned before, women are not a minority. So what can you do? We mentioned this as well. Educate yourself. Do not ask others. So this is a major point, because realize that you are taking resources from other people who repeated their stories. And I mean, we talked about this, that people talk about other people's experience, but if reading about the experience makes you learn, it's a good thing. Yeah, do it. So this is a big part of being an ally, because you can only recognize certain patterns if you educate yourself about this. And a big part of that is the unconscious bias, which we didn't discuss today, because unconscious bias, stereotypes you have engraved in your thinking because you learned them as a little child, because you were treated as a girl or you were treated as a boy and therefore encouraged to do this or that. And you have to challenge this unconscious bias. Read about it, read about examples, try to see the patterns in your own life. And for example, as you mentioned, when there is a woman interrupted in a meeting, just make the people aware of it, because they are used to this behavior. They do not reflect it every time. And all of us do not reflect it every time. I'm not taking myself out of this. I'm making mistakes every day, and it's totally okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to be silent. Silence is acceptance.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Like the power, and I've seen men do it brilliantly in meetings that I've been in, that when a woman has been interrupted, they've literally said, I'm sorry, she was still speaking. And the attention that brings to the issue straight away is so important. But how many other times have we been in those situations and those meetings where a woman's been interrupted and spoken over and everyone else has just accepted it and carried on? We need to call that stuff out. And yeah, absolutely. education is critical. The resources are there. You know, we could do an entire hour just on unconscious bias and the role that it plays in what we do. So if anybody is listening to this, watching this, and isn't aware of unconscious bias and what it does, then I would massively recommend, you know, do a quick Google, understand what it is, and educate yourself, because it's pretty terrifying, some of the stuff that goes on in our heads that we don't even think about. And then that plays out in perpetuating these patterns. So if I could come to you next, Mel.
It's interesting, actually. I was watching, I actually can't remember what it was, some kind of morning television this morning. And there was a black female on there, and she was discussing the kind of role models she had growing up and the names they had. So, you know, things like the Spice Girls, the black female in the Spice Girls is Scary Spice. And she also brought up the Chase, where the black male in the Chase is called the Dark Destroyer. Whereas other people, you know, there's no kind of darkness or anything like that discussed. And I thought that was really interesting, because, again, that's something that, while I feel I am an individual that educates myself a lot, I'd never thought about it in that kind of instance before. And it's one thing that I kind of took on board and was like, wow, that actually it's really negative, you know, wording that's being used there. So I think for men, they also need to kind of own kind of what their ancestors have done almost, and understand kind of what women have gone through, what women are still going through. For example, when females are attacked, they have to convince people, quite a lot of the time it's men as well. You know, the Meghan Markle thing's a perfect example. You know, she mentioned in this interview with Oprah that she thought about committing suicide, and Piers Morgan, from what I've seen on the news today, he said she's just attention seeking. And it's just disgusting. This is the same man that a year ago said we need to be more kind when Caroline Flack killed herself. So, you know, it's just disgusting, really. And I think women, when they do get the courage to speak up, if they've been attacked or they've been abused or anything like that, they have to prove themselves. And I don't think it's right. And that having to prove yourself all the time as a woman sits in the boardroom as well. You know, when you sit in a boardroom, you kind of have to prove yourself way more than a man has to prove yourself. So it's not just abuse, you know, it's kind of something as simple as in the workplace. You have to convince all the men there that you are good at what you do. I've had the situation in the last year with clients that I've had to convince the man that I actually do know better than him, and that is why he's employed me as a freelancer to do his digital marketing, because he doesn't know what he's doing. But he can't cope with that. He can't cope with the fact that a female is coming along that's younger than him, that knows, and he knows a lot of things that I have no idea about, because it was, you know, it's quite niche. So it's just one of those things that I think kind of own what you don't know is what I would say, and listen to what women are saying. They would be the bits of advice that I would give to allies.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, that listening, it comes up again and again, doesn't it? It's like, listen to women and believe what they're saying. The amount of times that stuff comes out years later and the immediate response is, well, if that was happening, why didn't she tell anyone? And then the next sentence is you pulling some woman to shreds for accusing somebody. It's like, how do you not see what you're doing? It's like, look at the way that you treat women when they do come out and share these stories. Of course, they're not doing it. And if that's happening to women with kind of, you know, normal men, in the sense of, you know, a normal level of power and influence, you know, how on earth do you go about it if it's Harry Weinstein? Like, if that's the level of power that they've got, why on earth would you think that you were going to be believed, that somebody would carry that story? And yeah, for a woman to stand up there and say that, you know, she felt suicidal, like, how dare you, like, then challenge it with no knowledge and say that that isn't true? But it just perpetuates that whole idea that, you know, we're all big fans of mental health until we need to do something about it. We're all big fans of women's rights until we have to do something about it. And we're just not trusting women and believing them and giving them that voice again. And you do see it in the workplace. There was an example a while ago that two colleagues swapped email inboxes. So they were sending out exactly the same emails, and it had happened, I think one of them had covered on an out of office, so it was originally a mistake. And he was like, I don't understand why all my clients are suddenly being so difficult. It's like, I would just tell them this stuff and they'd accept it, and now I'm being challenged. Worked out that this was why, and then did it as a deliberate study. And despite the fact that they're the same level, same amount of experience, just as good as doing the jobs as each other, that she was constantly getting challenged by clients to have to explain her ideas, to explain her experience, and was being quite challenged. Where if it came from the man's email address, they're like, all right, okay, cool, that's what I'm paying you for, you're the expert. And just something as simple as that, actually looking at the language that's used to the women that you speak with, how often they have to defend themselves and show their experience compared to the men that you work with. It's a really interesting exercise to help you understand how that works. So finally, if I could come to you, Phoebe, for your kind of views on allyship.
Yes, no, really interesting just hearing what you guys have to say. For me, like just doing my research as well and just looking into it a bit more. And I think there is a lot that men could be doing. I think there's a lot that men are currently doing, but obviously there is still that imbalance here. So, you know, allyship includes, you know, action and advocacy. So, you know, you have to do something, not just talk. You know, you have to have something to back it up. And, you know, what are you doing to support? And, you know, questioning the structure of business and speak out against the root causes. So again, in businesses, as you said, top of the chain, there's always somebody called John. John needs to look at himself and say, you know, why is this? And, you know, what can I do to make sure, you know, people with Sarah gets to the top as well, and it's not just John. So it's, you know, it starts from, you know, educating himself. And I think it's that continuous process of constantly learning, questioning, reevaluating, and not just being the one speaking in the room, but listening. You know, how much space are you taking up in conversations? You know, how much are you looking around and giving other people the opportunity? You know, how much power, privilege do you have in a situation? And how are you giving space to other people to actually contribute? I think those are things that not just for females, but for males as well. It's like for people with privilege and not knowing it, I think it all just comes down to education and, you know, being proactive and actually doing things rather than just saying things, because this is not a new conversation. This has been going on for ages. And for example, the whole situation this morning, watching Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan, I was just horrified, and I just can't believe this is on daytime TV with this guy. Just completely, it was embarrassing. And it's stuff like that, you know, it just makes you think, is this ever going to change? You know, this is somebody who a lot of people look up to, is in the media, influential, and, you know, spewing all that kind of nonsense on daytime TV. It just goes to show that we're far off. And, you know, even talking about mental health and all these things, it's very prominent in the news and in society, but still there is this block of, you know, you're up here and everybody else is, you know, your opinion is the only opinion and that's it. So it's breaking away from that. And I do think, you know, a lot of people need to show up in action, you know, when they talk, you know, have some backbone and, you know, stick to something rather than, you know, coming up with these things that are very hurtful to a lot of people. And, you know, women are not going to get very far without having that allyship. So it should be, you know, coming from the top and all these people supporting. So that's what I would say is, you know, action, advocacy, and continuous learning, because it's just for today as an example, it just goes to show that we're back at square one yet again.
Absolutely. And I think the summary there is that phrase that we'll have heard a lot: deeds, not words. Like, that is what this comes down to. It's like, if you're not doing something and you're just talking about it, that's not change. Using your hashtag, flying your rainbow flag, you know, going out and doing all of these things on the right day, it's like that's not what causes change. It's actually the actions that we put into place. Does anybody have any questions for the panel? I've seen one pop up on the chat, which I'll get to, but if anyone else has any questions, either give me a wave or raise hand emoji or pop it in the chat for me. So the question that I've got is, if you had to pick one thing that allies should watch or read, what would it be? If there was one thing that you'd like, everyone should read that, everyone should watch this, is there anything that you would recommend?
I would actually change that question, and I would say, I think you just need to sit down and listen to somebody, you know, rather than, you know, get yourself in a space that these conversations are happening, and sit down and listen, because they are happening. you know. So yeah, obviously there's loads of books and, you know, movies and all these things, but there are multiple different events and platforms there that these conversations are happening. And I would say find one of them and go and sit and listen to these, you know, these stories, because then and only then you'll really understand what's happening. And again, there's probably loads of other stuff we could do, but that's what I would say. It's not just, you know, go on your phone for a couple hours and read something, but you actually need to hear people's experience and really understand with that emotion as well. You know, this is real life.
Perfect. Any recommendations from the other panelists?
I think one of the best books I've read, it's not necessarily about feminism. It's called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and I think I've bought it for so many people now. I think I've bought about 15 copies of it, but for a variety of people. It's just one of those books that I finished and was like, wow, I still have to do a lot, and I feel like I'm a person that does educate myself on these things, and you know, I shout about them and things like that, and I put it on my social media, and I make sure people are aware not to be racist around me, and if they are, they get told where to go. But that book for me was a game changer in my perception of what Black people are still suffering in all around the world, and it's a really, really good book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of the people that you recommended it to and read last year, and it's difficult reading, and it really, what threw me was like, I grew up with this stuff going on around me. I was like, I can tell you all of Henry VI's wives and what happened to them. I can't tell you about the race riots that were going on whilst I was sitting in the classroom. I was like, what kind of education system is that? There's like, I'm well educated. Like, I had all these opportunities to learn, and it was just nowhere near the curriculum that we talked about. And yeah, it's a little scary how much of that stuff, you know, went on very recently, and has just, you know, never formed part of that kind of conversation. Jen, any final recommendations for somebody to read or watch?
I can totally confirm my journey with the book, why I'm not longer talking to white people about race, and just talking from a German perspective, never learned about the colonies that Germany had, because Germany just had a short time colonies, not to mention. And then I learned that Rwanda, which was a colony, has the best gender pay gap in the world, so the least, basically. Yeah, so we should basically learn from this country, and we felt, and still so many people feel so much better, and feel this white supremacy over Africa, and have crazy imagination about Africa. But we are here at International Women's Day, so I am strongly recommending to you the book Invisible Women. This is highlighting a problem we did not discuss today, and this is the gender data gap. Basically, our whole society is based on data that derives from surveys about men. Everything was and data is based on average men, sizes, whatever, medicine. And so it's proven women are more likely to die as well in hospitals with medical treatments. And even there is also the pain relation. Oh, you see, I'm getting emotional again. Women do not suffer pain, especially Black women do not suffer pain at all. So they do not get pain repellents and pain killers. And this you have to educate yourself about. So read Invisible Women. And if you are not good in reading, there's an audiobook as well. And I can also recommend Netflix Explained. This is a very good series to understand the world, explained everything, and Decoded. Decoded from MTV, long time on the stream. It's for free on YouTube. You can see it there. Decoded from MTV explains everything as well. Watch it from beginning to end, and you still will have to learn something, but it's a good preparation.
Fantastic, thank you. And yeah, Invisible Women, amazing. Again, it's one of those things that I read, being like, you know, I'm quite up on all of this stuff, and you know, understands a lot around, you know, gender inequality. And I had to read that book in segments because I was getting too angry. I had to be like, I'll read a chapter and then I'll go for a little walk and calm myself back down again. But it's just that sense that, you know, male is normal, women are abnormal. It's like, we're not a minority, we're not a small group of people. We have half the patients that you see, half the workforce, everything else. And yet just the over and over and over again of those examples as to, you know, why that is, you know, threatening our lives. And, you know, I'm lucky, well, I say lucky, I wouldn't have married him if he wasn't a feminist, but my husband is really up on this kind of stuff. So when I was reading it and he was like, I need to read this, and it was that heart attack example, and he was like, how would I know if you were having a heart attack if the only symptoms I know are the symptoms for a man? And it was like I could watch my wife die because nobody's taught me what the heart attack symptoms are for a woman. And it's that level of immediacy as to how important that data is. You know, this isn't a we get paid less, this is a we're dying more issue. Like, that's how important it is. So would absolutely back up that recommendation. It's a phenomenal piece of work. We are at the end of the, sorry, Phoebe.
Yeah, I think some of those books, if you want to drop the authors in the comments, I think that would be quite good. And that was actually quite interesting, because not just, you know, everything's on men in terms of all that medical and, you know, just in general, but in terms of like medicine as well, like all the examples and case studies and things people have in terms of symptoms and that, it's all for white people. So a black person will go in a hospital with a rash and the doctors will look at a book and has all white skin in there, and it's like, well, this doesn't match any of your symptoms. It's some stuff like that. Even it's, you know, in institution, it needs to change. And even growing up in the Caribbean, our history lessons was about Britain, not about, you know, anything about us. It was all about the empire, and it just baffles me. It's like, how did I not learn about my history? But all our books were coming from Britain. They're mentally telling us, you know, training us in that way, and nobody is standing up and say, well, actually, no, we're going to give them books that our people written about, you know, our culture and stuff like that. But no, we get institutionalized from day one. And I think unless people notice that, and it's not going to stop, it's just going to carry on. So that was quite interesting. But I'll definitely look at that book, Invisible Woman.
It's fantastic. It'll make you rage, but it's absolutely fantastic. And it is that from day one, it's, you know, what are we teaching our children in school? What are we teaching them in the workplace? What are all the things that we see around us? It's right the way through, that we need to be better at understanding this stuff. So thank you so much again to Neil for pulling this event together. Massive thank you to all of you for joining, and huge thanks to my three panelists today. I think we've all between us learned a lot by doing this. It's one of these things that, you know, regardless of how many times I have this conversation with people, there's always something else that I can learn. We will say we've recorded this, we're going to share it out. We've dropped some of those recommendations in the comments, but we will drop them out on our social as well, and for people who want to read or watch those afterwards. So absolutely massive thank you. I'm not going to say happy International Women's Day, but what I will say is let's continue celebrating the amazing women in our life. Let's keep celebrating all the good stuff that we're already doing, and then let's make sure that we keep challenging every time we have the opportunity to. Thanks ever so much, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now. Oh, I'm going to try. Apparently stopping recording is not my forte.